Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail. Today we're going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story, how I became a Wendigo. My name is Levi, and I'm 19. I live in the countryside of central North Carolina. I usually like to go on a walk in the woods after I get off work to relieve stress from working all night. Earlier this week, something strange made me question my entire reality. This is my story. The story of how I became a Wendigo. I was walking through the woods, as I usually did after getting off work, when I heard something ahead of me about 50 feet. I curiously walked over fallen logs and rotting leaves to investigate the noise I had heard. I instantly recoiled in horror at the disgusting sight laid before my eyes. There was a bloody corpse of a deer, its body almost unidentifiable with all the blood and insides splattered all over the fallen leaves. I regained my composure slightly until I realized I was getting hungry. I looked closer and realized that this dead thing was not a deer. I lost every sense of rationality as the hunger I felt enveloped me. I heard whispers in my mind as I suddenly realized my surroundings. It had grown dark and I had blood on my shirt. I let out a horrified scream as I realized what I had done. The whispers I had heard were speaking to me again. I heard them say, "You ate the flesh of the cursed king. Now you will become the new cursed king. Rejoice, for this is the time of rebirth, the time of new life." I felt the world fall to black. I woke up to see myself in a circle of blood, surrounded by hooded figures wearing deer skulls. On closer inspection, it seemed as if they weren't just masks. They chanted in a language I didn't understand, and I started to scream as I felt unbearable pain. I was unable to move as their chanting only grew louder. I blacked out and woke up an unknown time later on what I could only describe as a bloody throne of bones, rotten flesh, and what looked like bits of hair. I was unable to move as I saw a vision of what I call a Wendigo ripped its head off and slammed it on my own. There are things that have been happening to me that I cannot explain. I cannot help this feeling of dread and extreme hunger I have. I want to eat humans. I have an insatiable hunger, and I cannot escape what I have become. I cannot explain what I have become. I don't know what I'm going to do now. I felt extremely sick, and I passed out once more. As I slipped away from reality, I felt only pain and sorrow, but could not cry in pain. I somehow woke up in my room, and I've decided to seek help with the last of my sanity intact. Please, if you know what's going on, I need help. I've already eaten 4 people, and I'm starting to grow antlers and grow fur. My hands are black, and my claws make it hard to type. Please, I'm begging you. If you see me while traveling in North Carolina, kill me. I am leaving as soon as I post this, so I don't hurt anyone else. It's too late for me now. Second story. I know why so many people go missing for national parks. I don't know why I went to Mount Rainier. I know what I went to Mount Rainier for, but to this day, I don't really know why I felt so compelled to go. I've always been obsessively curious. I think that's probably the best way to describe it. I get these fascinations for things out of seemingly nowhere, and once that fascination lodges itself in my head, it quickly starts to take over every waking aspect of my life, it seems. Thinking about it turns into reading about it. Reading about it turns into researching it as thoroughly as possible. Research leads to investigation, and the rabbit hole of my obsessions just goes and goes. And then as suddenly as this obsession starts, it's gone. Complete and total disinterest just like that. Ever since I was a kid, it's been this way. I kind of compare it to an itch, and ultimately the only way to really stop an itch is to scratch it, right? I remember laying on my couch on a rainy off day from work and scrolling through YouTube while I waited for the Domino's guy to drop off some buffalo wings when a strange title I'd never heard of came up and caught my eye. Missing 411, Strange and Unexplained Disappearances in America's National Parks. As soon as I clicked on that video, I knew I'd found my newest obsession. The Dyatlov Pass incident I had been researching for months now was gone and out the window. Hindsight's always 20/20, as the saying goes. I had no idea that I was about to set an unchangeable course that led me to the horrifying reality I was soon to discover. 3 weeks and probably 100 videos, a handful of ordered books, and an endless scrolling through every forum and internet thread I could get my hands on. And I was still just as enamored with these missing 411s as I'd been when I first clicked on that initial YouTube video. I'd be genuinely surprised if there were a lot of people reading this who didn't know about David Paulides, the missing 411s, and all of confounding mysteriousness that surrounded these matters. But for those who might be out of the loop, I'll do my best to sum it up in a few little bullet points for you. Cliff notes, or whatever. There have been a disturbingly large number of unexplained disappearances in America's national parks. And by large number, I mean 2,000. That's more than everyone in the North Tower on September 11th. 2,000 people just vanishing in the woods with no explanation whatsoever. 2. A lot of these people are never seen/heard from again. That in its own right is insane given the technologies that we have and the massive searches that are sometimes carried out for these people. But what's even weirder is that the people that are eventually found leave us more questions than answers. Kids go missing and are found miles and miles away from the initial search zone, way further than even top survival experts are able to walk. People's bodies turn up in super obvious areas that have been searched multiple times by search and rescue teams. Search dogs will have a good, obvious trail on the missing person and then just lose it. Sometimes all they find are the person's shoes. Sometimes they find the person with no shoes at all. Sometimes the bodies look like they've fallen from a great height despite there being no high ground to fall off of, etc. 3. The number of times military units have been deployed to go and search for missing people is eyebrow-raising, to say the least. The military is very effective, but they're not search and rescue. They're trained to seek and destroy, not really search and save. For the National Park Service gets very, very sketchy when it comes to any kind of further inquiry. This has led a lot of people to believe that they're covering something up. Now, me being the obsessive person that I am, immediately started trying to sleuth around for some kind of conclusion. What was the overall theory? What do people think was going on here? I guess because the speculation can go on forever. The theories go on forever too. Everything from rich megalomaniacs on hunting trips, aliens, wendigos, and skinwalkers, Bigfoot abductions, parallel universes. The list is truly endless. So many different theories, and as wild as some of them might sound at first. It's beyond eerie how quickly they begin to sound more than rational, and even possible with just a little bit of explanation. But as I poured through the seemingly endless accounts and rumors, there was one theory that hit a stronger chord with me than the rest. Feral people. In a nutshell, the theory is that during the Great Depression, maybe even earlier, people took off with their families deep into these wilderness regions to live off the land and get away from the crippling poverty of the cities and towns during that time. Generations of incest and isolation resulted in their ancestors being what we would consider feral, completely hostile, incapable of reasoning that we can comprehend, with a multi-generational knowledge of the land they lived in and how to survive it, paired with a relatively untouched, government-protected, after all, access to a virtually endless number of resources. Other humans, if the opportunity presented itself, could not only be a decent food opportunity, but they were also food opportunity with extremely valuable tools just ripe for taking. Like cereal with a prize in the box, can you imagine how valuable a water bottle would be to a caveman? How wildly priceless a fishing pole would look. The National Park Service knows about these feral people, but they also know it'd be a huge risk to go traipsing in the wilderness looking for bloodthirsty cannibals that are more competent and dangerous than even the most apex predators they live with. They also provide an extremely valuable insight for scientists to study all sorts of things about human nature, but from time to time they get a little too close, or they get too bold and give their locations away. The military gets called in to dispose of these tribes in a discreet and efficient manner before more people disappear. And as a result, more people take to the woods to find their missing people. For whatever reason, this theory made perfect sense to me. Well, almost perfect sense. It checked almost all the boxes. Children and elderly people go missing because they're the easiest to overpower. Hikers who are by themselves go missing because they're by themselves and can be ambushed quicker than a group of hikers could. Hunters go missing because they're far off the beaten path and they have weapons that are worth the risk. It even explains why bow hunters tend to go missing more than gun hunters. Bows are easier to figure out and lower maintenance. We already know people go missing without a trace and are never found again. Would it be so wild to say in the same breath that people are never found in the first place for the same reasons? Even most of your Bigfoot sightings in these national parks could be explained with the feral people theory. Imagine what you would look like if you had never had a haircut, if you'd never take a shower, or clipped your nails, or combed your hair, or shaved your beard. Throw a Habsbourg jaw or a heavy brow in the mix from years of intrafamilial breeding, and you're pretty much the perfect definition of a Sasquatch at that point. But for all the information and cross-examinations that I would read about to seemingly prove this theory, there were admittedly a few glaring loopholes that with a bit more thought would very quickly start to pull the whole idea apart. Humans are truly a scourge on this planet. Anywhere we go, we leave a mess. We make smoke from fires. We burn things down accidentally. We cut down trees and leave bones lying all over the place. The very steps we take kill the forest floor, leaving huge patches of dirt wherever we stay for more than a few days. We are hands down the easiest animal to find. Every human that's ever walked the earth inherently believes that the earth is theirs. I guess that manifests even in the most unconscious of ways. Not to mention the scientific probabilities, infertility that comes with incest, crippling genetic mutations, etc. For all the positive evidence, I'll be the first to admit there were some serious holes in the theory. So around and around I went with this concept. For months, ruling it in and ruling it out. Until one day, I was given what I can only describe as a divine revelation. Like the conspiracy gods took pity on my slow decay into insanity and threw me a nice big bone to chew on, and this one actually had some meat on it. I had fallen asleep on the couch amidst another bout of determined research. YouTube was once again in the background. When I woke up from my nap, I went for the remote when the narrator of the video caught my attention. Missing 411s had rabbit holed into unexplained mysteries in general, and unexplained mysteries had rabbit holed into crazy discoveries made by scientists and historians. The narrator was talking about this skull that had been found. The picture of it was posted up for the viewer to see while he talked about it. It was an old, weathered-looking skull that had puncture holes in the cranium part. Because of these holes, scientists thought for a long time that this child had been the victim of a human sacrifice. But through a series of discoveries, it was made apparent that this child in actuality had been picked clean off the ground by a crowned eagle. Suddenly it hit me. I sprang out of my seat like a madman as all the pieces began to fall together like an Arabic's cube that was all but solving itself. Giant. Eagles. I know. It sounds ridiculous. On the surface, more ridiculous than any other theory brought forward. But like my dad always said, the difference between bat's hit and guano is the stuff that's inside it. And this was no different. I'm not going to get into every painful detail here, but I do have to point out a few just to show you where I'm coming from here. Eagles eat takeout. They swoop in, snatch and kill their food, fly it back, and eat in the nest. This explains why people go missing and are never found again. They're being looked for somewhere on the forest floor, when they've actually been carried up a mountain and dropped in a nest somewhere. This also explains why the people who are found are way further out than they by all rights should be, and why so many seem to have fallen from a great height. The eagle takes someone who's a little too heavy, takes someone who doesn't die right away and squirms a bit too much, gets spooked or startled, and needs to fly faster, and they drop their meal. 2. Eagles are ambush predators. They hang out on a perch, and as soon as they see a tasty snack, they swoop and pin it down, kill it, then swoop back with their newly acquired meal to wherever it is they nest at. This explains why so many lone hikers go missing off a trail. Just like a hunter would babysit a game trail for deer An eagle babysits a footpath for humans. And speaking of deer. 3. An eagle large enough to swoop up with a human would more than likely have a reliable food source of deer. And there are a crap ton of deer. In Yellowstone alone, there are over 2,000 mule deer running around. And that's just mule deer, and this is the very reason why hunters go missing. If you're out hunting a deer, then chances are you're wearing scents and making deer calls. In other words, you are actively trying to convince deer that you are in fact also a deer, but the same artificial smells and bleats that would attract a nice big 10-point would just as easily be a free food sign for a large bird of prey. For this also explains why so many times only aspects of the missing person have been found. Shoes, backpacks, cameras, hiking sticks, bows, etc. Eagles are smart creatures. They probably learned pretty quickly that there's a lot of stuff on these humans that aren't edible. Clothing can be torn through easily enough, but the thicker, more durable stuff gets ripped off and discarded. Like a deer's antlers. The feet are torn off by the ankles, and smaller animals eat whatever is left inside. Now, I know if you're reading this, you're probably thinking one glaring thing. Come on, Saint_Circa. You'd think someone would notice giant eagles flying around. But they have. That's why the National Park Service gets so shady when people try to investigate further. They are well aware that there are giant eagles living in the hundreds of miles these national parks reach out to sometimes, and considering eagles only hunt in a roughly 15 to 20 mile perimeter around their nests, they know exactly where to find them as well. America's national bird is the bald eagle. It's been that way since 1782. By 1963, there were only 400 nesting pairs of bald eagles in the entire country. Why? Because people shot them out of the sky in droves. Not for their meat, not for their valuable talons or beaks. Researchers say that these eagles were killed mainly to see them up close. That's it. Do you think for half a second there wouldn't be 1,000 hillbillies with birdshot scouring the entire countryside the second it was discovered that there were giant eagles flying around? My best guess is that the National Park Service works in tandem with wildlife conservationist groups to keep these endangered animals as secret as possible. But you can't just let giant man-eating eagles each other willy-nilly and fly around eating whatever they want whenever they feel like. No one's going to go spend money to hang out in a natural park they'll be killed and eaten at. That'd be horrible for business. In comes the military. You see, it's not just the military that's sent out to find these missing people. It's one particularly small but highly effective section of the military, and that section is the Green Berets. Green Berets have a large set of skills, but two of their main purposes are special reconnaissance and unconventional warfare. And almost all their operations fall under the category of classified. In layman's terms, they specialize in finding things and reporting information on it, and killing things in very unique and creative ways. And then, of course, they're not allowed to talk about any of it. Total secrecy. You think these guys get called out because Tiny Tim got turned around in the woods? Bullshit. The government can't even send a real hazmat team to Palestine, Ohio, when a chemical fire radiates the entire town. No, they go out there when park rangers suspect Tiny Tim got turned into a giant eagle's lunch, and they need the best of the best to identify if that is indeed the case, and take it down/dispose of it properly if it is, and keep their mouths shut about it afterwards. They get sent out when scientists speculate that the giant eagle population has grown too high and is risking compromise. The Green Berets go out and depopulate a bit, keep the population under control, and keep their mouth shut about it afterwards. They get sent out when one dies so they can collect the body for research and keep their mouths shut about it afterwards. I was absolutely sure of it. But even after this certainty cemented itself into everything else I knew to be true, a new, dangerous itch began to invade the back of my mind. You can't just know that a house is haunted. You have to actually see the ghost, don't you? I fought it for longer than I thought possible, but within 7 months of watching that first video, I found myself driving to Mount Rainier. I had to complete the experiment. I had to be sure that I was sure, that I was sure. How's that song go? The old 80s one? Blinded with science. Took forever to plan the trip. I'd already been spending weeks studying things about eagles, but now I had to reorient and study how to spot eagles, when they hunted, how to watch them without spooking them, etc. But after 4 deep diving months, I had my plan and everything I needed to carry it out. I chose Mount Rainier for 2 reasons. The first being it was close, the second being that there have been an unusual number of disappearances not only on the mountain itself, but in the entirety of the national park that surrounded it, even by national park standards. In the small hours of the morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise, I took off down the trail and began looking for the perfect spot to set up my blind. Seen normal eagles hang out in big trees or on the sides of cliffs, but my hypothesis was that a giant eagle would probably be hanging out in crevices against cliffs. When something it could eat walked into its radar, it would swoop out and ambush it. About 4 hours into my trip, I found a spot I thought was ideal. A small hilltop with trees, but not too many trees. At the bottom of the hill to my left, a large cliff wall could be seen. To the right was relatively flat land with enough space in between for a large bird to fly through unhindered. And so I waited and waited and waited. For 3 days, I sat in that blind, watching the deer, eating cold maize, and trying my hardest not to doze off. At the beginning of day 4, however, it would all change. I was just considering leaving. When you're alone in a ramshackle tent, it doesn't take long for your mind to convince you of what an idiot you are. Giant eagles? Come on, Saint_Circa. Look at all the time you've wasted. Why can't you get hooked on something productive? As a big 10-point stepped out of the brush into the area just in front of me, I watched it with a sort of boredom. Deer are cool the first time you see one, but this had to have been the 100th deer in 3 days that I'd seen, and at the end of the day, they're just horses with antlers. They mosey, they eat. They poop and leave. I guess in my boredom, I didn't really notice how quiet the forest had gotten. The deer did, though. It stopped mid-bite and perked its head up, locked rigidly into place with a big mess of grass hanging out of its mouth. And that's what happened. It was so fast my mind hardly had time to process it. One moment the deer was standing there, and the next it was pinned to the ground. I sat there wide-eyed and in shock from the hidden barrier of my blind. Standing over this thing was the largest animal I had ever seen. Its huge wingspan seemed to stretch endlessly. It had to have been 40 feet from end to end. The forest floor was shaded almost completely as its outstretched wings blotted the sun from the sky. Even without the wings, it was almost too large to comprehend. At least 8 feet off the ground on its 2 lone legs. Its dinosaur-like eyes gazing emptily into its prey like huge orbs of golden fire. The poor animal let out one bleated scream before the eagle's large beak tore into its neck, sending streams of blood and tissue across the forest floor like something out of a slasher movie. I could hear bones crunching violently even from the distance I was at. Suddenly I realized I had to take a photo. No one would believe it if I didn't show them firsthand. Even then, they'd have probably thought it was just a hoax. Green screens and CGI and Photoshop, all that shit. I raised the lens of my camera towards the creature with shaking hands and snapped a shot. Huge mistake. As soon as the camera made that stupid little fluttering sound, the eagle's head snapped instantly in my direction. Its lifeless eyes staring with pure instinct straight through the camouflage of my structure. It saw me. Before I could react, there was a sharp blast of wind. In less than a moment, the entire blind was ripped off of its stakes and thrown into the woods around me. As I recovered and looked around, panic-stricken, I could see the horrible thing tearing into the remnants of the plastic structure some 15 or 20 feet in front of me, trying to find me inside of it. With everything I could muster, I took off in the direction of my car. I've never ran so fast in my life. It took a long time to get back to my car, and the few times I stopped to try and catch my breath or dry heave, I was all but sure would result in me being another missing 411 on Mount Rainier. After what felt like days of almost endless running, I made it back to my car, exhausted and frightened for my life. As I sat in the driver's seat, hyperventilating from exhaustion and weeping from fear, I couldn't wrap my mind around what I'd just witnessed or how I was still here to think about it. The only thing I could think about was getting to hell as far away from Mount Rainier as possible. As I made the long drive home, and my thoughts began to somewhat return to me, I concluded that the eagle must have gotten itself trapped in the blind just long enough for me to get away. It was either that or the deer it killed had way more meat than I did, and it was already dead. I guess it'd be pointless to chase a smaller prey. Eagles are wicked smart after all. I tried to contact several authorities afterwards, but surprise, surprise, no one believed it. You know, sir, eagles are a lot bigger than people initially think they are. Are you sure you weren't using any illegal substances? Okay, well, we'll send someone out to look at it and tell you what we find. Uh-huh. We'll let you know if we find anything. We'll let you know. That camera is still out there in the woods with the rest of my stuff. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to try and go back for it. Maybe someone will find it, and the truth will be that much harder to dismiss. For now, I only have you guys to tell. The National Park Service is hiding something big in the mountains and forests of the United States. And if you ever go hiking in one of these remote places, make sure you are never alone. Third story, the great cryptid hunt. My brother is missing. He has been gone for the better part of 2 years. This wouldn't be unusual for Gary, though. We grew up together, separated by only a few years. He was always the adventurous one, courageous, brave, and intelligent. The worst combination for an older brother. Everybody loved and admired him, and I lived in his shadow. Most people would be resentful, but Gary was a character who raised those around him. I always knew he would end up making a positive difference in the world. When he told me he was going to be away for a few months the summer of my senior year, I wasn't surprised. He had been involved with a statewide operation which led to the seizure of a large amount of narcotics. He was an investigative journalist and had spent months working from the inside to build a case for the local police. The next big case was another year undercover, working to tear down an arms dealer. The group were supplying and fueling gang wars, profiting from the lives of men killed by the weapons he put in their hands. He told me some details over drinks one night over the holidays. He didn't say much until late into the night. He told me how involved he needed to be to get into a position to know the head of the operation. Things he didn't like to reminisce on for too long. It was the same night that he told me about his next assignment. He was working on bringing down a worldwide organization who arranged big game hunting trips for seedy individuals. I met him a couple of months later, and he told me he was leaving the country to meet up with the group. That was the last I heard from him until today. I received an email this morning from an unknown sender. The subject title said, "For the attention of the big fella." I normally would delete these on receipt, but the title caught my attention. Gary had always called me the big fella since I passed him in height at 15. I'm about an inch taller than him and wouldn't be considered the big fella by any means. The email contained a text file and journal detailing his time spent with the group. The text file just said the following: "I don't think I'm going to make it back from this one, big fella. The latter is why I have reached out to you. I fear something terrible has happened. I'm trying to track down his location from any clues hidden in these files. Unfortunately, I have to piece together the story from fragmented documents. I'm hoping one of you may be able to help locate him." May 5th, 2022. Last week, I received the notification to meet in a small town in North Dakota. It was addressed to Mr. John Adden Marley, the alias in which I have been communicating under. The letter was stamped with a golden view at the head of the page. There was a list of essentials such as camping equipment, warm clothing, and hunting equipment. Food would be provided on site before departure. There was a highlighted asterisk beside hunting equipment. It said if bringing your own weaponry, rifle and sidearm must be compatible with .308 and 9mm caliber respectively. Weapons will be provided on departure if requirements cannot be met. The request felt strange to me, but I knew this group was very exclusive in admission and presumed it was part of their procedures to remain anonymous. The final part of the note stated the next part of the trip would be confirmed on the day. Our meeting point is situated on the outskirts of a forest. The town seems abandoned other than the people from the Venators, Latin for the hunters, a mix of men and women equipped in military-grade gear, quite heavy-duty for a simple hunting expedition. The main spokesperson for the Venators was a broad man called Crane. He wore a dusty black cowboy hat pulled down his eyes. His right cheek had 3 prominent scars running towards his top lip. I'd like to thank you all for joining us on the first great cryptid hunt. This adventure will bring us into contact with the most prestigious prey known to man. I wasn't sure what he meant by cryptid, but the other 10 people who seemed to be joining the party didn't look too confused by this. I'd just like to remind you all that this hunt is partaken at your own risk. I'm presuming you have the necessary precautions in place if something were to go wrong. A slight murmur of agreement from the crowd allowed Crane to continue. This is your last chance to pull out. Once I name our first intended target, there is no going back. Please return to your vehicle and leave if you have any doubt about your commitment. He eyed the group, intensely waiting for our response. When no one backed away, he smiled. With that, we are bound to the hunt. He raised a fist in triumph. Go collect your ammunition from the table to your left. Silver bullets are the only thing that can take down a Wendigo. The group set out as the sun reached its peak. Crane, the only member of the Venators. The others were to hold down base camp and come to our aid if the need arose. They also were arranging transport for the next trip to Ireland. For members of the gang split off to the right. A hushed but frantic discussion barely audible. Marco, the son of an Italian superyacht distributor, was accompanied by his partner Lola and 2 friends, Antonio and Michael, all of whom were reassuring Lola that this trip was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see the magical creatures walk among us. I was unsure how anyone would describe a Wendigo as magical from the stories you would hear on the internet. My expectations for this hunt have reduced dramatically. The thoughts of uncovering a huge, illegal hunting enterprise have tethered out as I realized we will be hunting a planted elk with a sound box attached. It's hard to comprehend how the Venators have managed to pull the wool over the eyes of so many wealthy and prominent figures. For the sake of my cover, I know I will need to play my role in this trip, but I'm hopeful that I may depart before the next destination. Where's the next leg of the trip, by the way? I called out to Crane, who led the party as we broke through the tree line. Yes, I knew I was forgetting something. He turned to address us. The next target is a mythical siren who calls out to announce the passing of loved ones. A banshee? Joshua questioned in a thick Texan accent. He too adorned a cowboy hat, but his was polished and new. You got it in one, Mr. Williams. Crane clapped his hands enthusiastically. You hear that, Junior? We're heading to Ireland. Joshua clapped his son on the back as the two discussed the terrain they may have to deal with while hunting a banshee. Joshua Jr., or J.J. as he was known, was the spitting image of his father, albeit about half his size. J.J. needed every bit of his belt loop to keep his trousers above his ankles. As night fell, we made our camp in a clearing that Crane had spotted. We'll take turns on duty tomorrow night, if it takes that long. Tonight, I'll let you get some rest. No need to be the hero, Crane. Each one of us is experienced enough to keep a fire going. Crane dismissed the remark with some reassuring words on how he was well rested and would enjoy the tasks. That seemed to settle Joshua as he felt there was no questioning of his abilities. I took out my notepad to scribble down my thoughts on the day so far. I was running through ideas of how the Venators were concocting this fraudulent trip when J.J. approached. Are you working on your checklist? He asked as he sat down beside me. No, just journaling the day. I like to get my thoughts down while they're still fresh. My response didn't seem to register with J.J. Me and Pops have most things checked off already. Lions, elephants, cheetahs, even a grizzly or 2. Jay seemed to be reminiscing as he asked, have you ever encountered anything of this kind before? Not even in the slightest. It was an honest response. I'm aware of how much it cost to get involved with the Venators, and JJ and his father had paid double. I didn't want to be the one to break the news that what we were searching for was no more than a dud. We saw something like this on our farm a couple of years back. Kept terrorizing our cattle, tore some of them to pieces, so it did. He looked over towards his father. Pops didn't know what to do. He shot the son of a bitch damn near 10 times. It just kept coming back. Ended up having to call Mr. Bolton. He gestured to another member of our group who sat alone, cleaning his rifle. Caleb Bolton was a dark-skinned man with cat-like eyes. He had his head shaved to the skin. A tree trunk-like neck was in proportion to the rest of his body. Mr. Bolton came late one night and set off into the darkness. The next morning, he came back covered in blood and deep gashes. He walked right up to Pa and said, "It's been dealt with," and just walked right off. Pop slipped him an envelope worth more than all the cows on the farm. He went off into the distance, leaving a trail of blood in his wake. I looked over Caleb, wondering what brought a man like him here, only to notice he was staring right back. The night wore on with nothing to report. We settled in and went to sleep as Crane looked out into the forest. I woke up late into the night as a sharp stick I missed nearly punctured my lung as I rolled over. I could see Crane sitting with his back to a tree, face illuminated by the glow of his cigarette. "Can't sleep, Mr. Marley?" Crane asked as he fished another cigarette out of his pack and handed it to me. "You can call me Jonathan," I said as I lit the cigarette. I sat down beside him looking out over the camp. "Will the fire not attract the Wendigo?" I asked, gesturing to the crackling blaze in the center of the sleeping bags. "No need to worry about that, Jonathan." Crane tipped the ashes onto a stone beside him and pointed across the camp into a dense area of trees. "He's been following us since we got here." Crane's words stayed with me as I lay awake. There was a small part of me that was truly scared. The part that was largely present as a child when the darkness held shadows of figures you couldn't comprehend. His demeanor would convince most that we truly were dealing with a creature of the supernatural. I left his side feeling as if we were the ones being hunted. Full of mixed emotions, I tossed and turned for what seemed like hours. My skepticism battling hard against the situation I'd found myself in. The forest added to my unease. Branches rustled as a slight breeze blew through the camp. The debate playing out in my mind was silenced by a strangled scream that echoed through the encampment. "Where's Lucas?" Ellie asked as she ripped out of her sleeping bag, grabbing her husband Levi by the shoulders. Levi gathered up his rifle and started towards the location of the uproar, calling out for his son. Caleb and Crane are already ahead of him. I followed after bringing the handgun I had under my pillow. Caleb and Crane split off in separate directions, directing each other through pointing and gestures. They encircled an area 15 feet from where I stood. Crane surveyed the area thoroughly as Caleb scanned the trees. "Something was here all right, but I don't think it was your son." Crane looked at Levi, his face full of concern. That sense of dread intensified. Marco and Antonio came rushing towards us, the faces slick with sweat. "Lucas is okay. He was just going to the toilet," Marco said, panting. "He came back not long after you left. We weren't sure what to do, so we came to get you," Antonio said, hunching over from the extension. Levi let out a sigh of relief as he made his way over to thank the guys for bringing the good news. I turned to Crane to ask him what he thought could have made the noise, but the color had drained from his face. "We have to get back now." Crane pushed past us at full sprint, heading in the direction of camp. "It seems we have been fooled," Caleb said, much more calmly than the situation deserved. We raced through the trees, receiving nicks and cuts as we ran without hesitation. I was pulling away from the main group, just keeping pace with Crane and Caleb. My arms pumping like pistons working to their max. The two in front didn't seem to be putting much effort in their stride, yet they ate up the ground like a marathon runner on his first mile. They were discussing what they might find on our return, but I was focused on filling my lungs with deep breaths to hear what they were saying. They burst into camp, frightening the 4 remaining members who looked perfectly fine sitting around the fireplace. "Jesus Christ, Crane, You frightened me half to death." Michael was gripping his rifle tightly as the others shrank in behind him. Levi was next to break the clearing, overjoyed to see his family safe and well. Ellie went over to greet him. As she stretched out her arm to take his hand in hers, Lucas let out a cry of panic. Her arm never made it far enough to embrace her husband. The Wendigo burst out from the shadows, grabbing Ellie by the arm and tearing it off, and he flung her down on the moss-covered floor. She bounced with the force, but managed to remain conscious as the beast reared his fangs at her face. The sight of the creature made my blood turn to ice. It was humanoid in some respects, although its limbs were elongated beyond belief. Its ribs protruded its sides, stretching its pale skin to bursting point. Blood ran down its face and chest as it tore a chunk from the arm in which it held. It seemed to stare into my soul as I froze in place awaiting certain death. Michael aimed at the monstrous figure but pulled his shot. The bullet struck Ellie in the temple. On reflection, I believe it to be an act of mercy from whatever God looks down upon us. The Wendigo screamed in anger and flung Ellie's body towards us. It crashed into Lucas, knocking him back several feet, his mother's blood covering him in a shower of crimson. My stomach emptied itself of any contents left from dinner. The Wendigo stomped towards us, true evil glistening in the moonlight. Levi managed to pull himself from his daze once he noticed the creature heading towards his son. He looked at his wife's corpse and pure rage boiled over. He tackles the Wendigo with all his might, knocking the beast back into the fire. It tripped over as its right foot caught ablaze. Levi fell on top of it and unloaded the clip of his pistol into the creature's chest. For every bullet he fired, the Wendigo tore off a strip of flesh. His chest was opened first, a mist of red spraying into the night sky. His face was the next to go. Teeth were launched 10 feet in all directions. Levi kept firing through this brutal assault. As the hammer clicked empty, not much remained to identify Levi. His rage-fueled attack cost him his life. The Wendigo pushed the remains of Levi to the side and clambered to its feet. The silver bullets lodged into his chest were bringing this monster closer to its final breath. "Steady now," Crane called out as he raised his sights. "On my mark." Lucas roared as he ran towards the Wendigo. He brandished a blade from its sheath with murderous intentions. I tried to grab him as he raised the blade for the killing blow. I could see what looked like a grin on the face of the Wendigo through the large gaping hole of Lucas's chest. The Wendigo had punched through, tearing his heart out in one swift motion. "Forsake," Crane said in disbelief. "Fire!" The forest erupted in a cacophony of gunfire as bits of Wendigo were torn apart. It crumpled to the ground, relishing in the delight to gain one more soul before it fell. Crane dropped his rifle and walked back to his tree where his cigarettes once were. He picked up the tattered box which had been destroyed in the melee. I offered him one of mine as we sat by the tree, soaked in the blood of many. "And then there was 7, he said as he ignited his match on the stricker box. Fourth story. There's something evil lurking in Hoosier National Forest. I've been more than a little hesitant to post this, but after what just happened on my last hike, I feel like there's no other choice. The parks may suffer for it, but people have to know. There's something evil in Hoosier National Forest. Possibly more than one. I've had similar encounters in multiple parks within HNF. Enough to make me question if one thing could be responsible for all of them. I've been followed on trails before. I've heard voices out in the woods that couldn't possibly be real. People who are too far away to be there. People who are dead. I once heard my granny's voice coming from a cave in Hemlock Cliffs. On my last hike, I went to Mogan Ridge, hiked the East Trail. It was scenic and beautiful. A nice day, if a little humid. Not too sunny, not too windy. The hike was going wonderfully, until I realized that something was following me. I've seen and heard a lot of weird things in the woods, but this blows them all out of the water. Or woods, rather. Nothing I've seen or heard has ever come close to being this. I was about 3 miles out when I started putting together the weird sounds. Crunching noises, like someone chewing on ice mixed with joints rolling, coupled with a slithering sound like something heavy being dragged through the leaf litter. I was out there with a friend, because hiking alone is stupid and dangerous. I noticed the sounds first. I stopped walking to listen for a second. I think I said something like, "Hey, John, do you hear that?" When my friend stopped to listen too, the slithering stopped. The crunching kept going, though. It was a really nasty sound, the kind you can feel in your neck that makes your spine want to twist up. Like somebody chomping down on something hard, like that sound when you roll your neck or crack your knuckles. The kind of sound you can feel in the fillings of your teeth. It was unsettling enough that neither of us wanted to stick around and find out what was making the noises. Neither John or I are fearful people, but something about those crunching noises sounded wrong, out of place and threatening. We started walking again, and the slithering started up again. At first we thought maybe it was my walking stick making the dragging noise, but when I held it up away from the ground, the slithering didn't stop. John suggested weakly that maybe we were dragging our feet, and that was what was making the noise, but we both knew that wasn't it. The trail was too steep and too rocky to drag your feet on. Our next guess was a snake, but snakes in Indiana don't get big enough to make dragging sounds like whatever was making that creepy slithering sound. That was about when we started to hear the heavy breathing, like somebody behind us was panting down our necks. Once that started up, we really began shitting ourselves with fear. Because black bears have been sighted recently in Harrison County, a stone's throw from Perry County where Mogan Ridge is. We were certain that any second a bear was going to jump out of a stand of trees and eat us both alive until the whispering started. At that moment, we knew it was not a bear. Bears do not whisper. Nothing in the woods whispers. Not even mockingbirds. That just made it so much worse. Because whatever was breathing down our necks, whatever was crunching and slithering behind us, it was speaking and it knew our names. John, John. Ash, Ash. John, John, John. Ash, Ash, Ash. Look at me, John, look at me. Ash, look at me. Turn around, turn around, turn around. Look at me. And all the while it whispered, the chomping sounds continued. I began to fear that those sounds were it chewing on the bones of the last hiker to come through here. I braved a glance over at John, and John braved a glance over at me, and there were tears running down his face like the Ohio River was flowing out of his eyeballs. I can only assume the same look of terror and despair was etched into my own face. I wanted nothing more than to run away, run all the way to the end of the trail, and get in the car and never, ever come back here. To never go within 10 feet of another tree ever again. But the hill we were climbing was too steep to run up. I could only walk slowly up the hill, this thing behind me all the while whispering to me, say my name. I don't know how long it went on, hours, maybe? It felt like days. We ran whenever we could. Wherever the ground was flat enough, we ran. But no matter how fast we went, we could never seem to outrun it. It was always right behind us, whispering in our ears. Ash, Ash, Ash. Such a waste of talent, such a waste of potential. Will your parents miss you when I've stripped the skin from your flesh? Will they notice you're gone when I've sucked the marrow from your bones? I thought the nightmare would never end. I thought I'd die on that trail, my bones picked clean and scattered among the rocks. No one would ever know where I'd gone. That I'd drag my friend to death alongside me. I've never run so fast as I did when I realized the trail had begun to loop back around to the trailhead. That was almost to the car, only a quarter mile more to go. I don't remember falling. I only remember something grabbing my ankle and pulling me down, dragging me backwards. The sound of my own screams ringing in my ears. John screaming. John pulling on my arm, dragging me out of the creature's grip. Crawling up the last hill on my hands and knees, rocks slicing into my skin. Screaming, and then light. The parking lot. John pulling me back to my feet, running to the car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, I looked back and I saw it. Tall, corpse pale, skeletal, skin stretched taut over bones. Hunched over on all fours, limbs inhumanly long with too many joints. No eyes, only gaping holes in its face. A grin of blackened razors as it watches us pull away, lifting one skeletal arm up to wave at us. A single human arm clutched in its grip, torn off at the shoulder. Fifth story. There's something evil lurking in Hoosier National Forest. I've been more than a little hesitant to post this, but after what just happened on my last hike, I feel like there's no other choice. The parts may suffer for it, but people have to know. There's something evil in Hoosier National Forest. Possibly more than one. I've had similar encounters in multiple parks within HNF. Enough to make me question if one thing could be responsible for all of them. I've been followed on trails before. I've heard voices out in the woods that couldn't possibly be real. People who are too far away to be there. People who are dead. I once heard my granny's voice coming from a cave in Hemlock Cliffs. On my last hike, I went to Mogan Ridge, hiked the East Trail. It was scenic and beautiful. A nice day, if a little humid, not too sunny, not too windy. The hike was going wonderfully, until I realized that something was following me. I've seen and heard a lot of weird things in woods, but this blows them all out of the water. Or woods, rather. Nothing I've seen or heard has ever come close to being this. I was about 3 miles out when I started putting together the weird sounds. Crunching noises, like someone chewing on ice mixed with joints rolling, coupled with a slithering sound like something heavy being dragged through the leaf litter. I was out there with a friend, because hiking alone is stupid and dangerous. I noticed the sounds first. I stopped walking to listen for a second. I think I said something like, "Hey, John, do you hear that?" When my friend stopped to listen too, the slithering stopped. The crunching kept going, though. It was a really nasty sound, the kind you can feel in your neck that makes your spine want to twist up, like somebody chomping down on something hard, like that sound when you roll your neck or crack your knuckles. The kind of sound you can feel in the fillings of your teeth. It was unsettling enough that neither of us wanted to stick around and find out what was making the noises. Neither John or I are fearful people, but something about those crunching noises sounded wrong, out of place and threatening. We started walking again, and the slithering started up again. At first we thought maybe it was my walking stick making the dragging noise, but when I held it up away from the ground, the slithering didn't stop. John suggested weakly that maybe we were dragging our feet, and that was what was making the noise, but we both knew that wasn't it. The trail was too steep and too rocky to drag your feet on. Our next guess was a snake, but snakes in Indiana don't get big enough to make dragging sounds like whatever was making that creepy slithering sound. That was about when we started to hear the heavy breathing, like somebody behind us was panting down our necks. Once that started up, we really began shitting ourselves with fear. Because black bears have been sighted recently in Harrison County, a stone's throw from Perry County, where Mogan Ridge is. We were certain that any second a bear was going to jump out of a stand of trees and eat us both alive until the whispering started. At that moment, we knew it was not a bear. Bears do not whisper. Nothing in the woods whispers. Not even mockingbirds. That just made it so much worse. Because whatever was breathing down our necks, whatever was crunching and slithering behind us, it was speaking and it knew our names. John, John. Ash, Ash. John, 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 Ash, Ash, Ash. Look at me, John, look at me. Ash, look at me. Turn around, turn around, turn around. Look at me. And all the while it whispered, the chomping sounds continued. I began to fear that those sounds were chewing on the bones of the last hiker to come through here. I braved a glance over at John, and John braved a glance over at me, and there were tears running down his face like the Ohio River was flowing out his eyeballs. I can only assume the same look of terror and despair was etched into my own face. I wanted nothing more than to run away, run all the way to the end of the trail, and get in the car and never, ever come back here. To never go within 10 feet of another tree ever again. But the hill we were climbing was too steep to run up. I could only walk slowly up the hill, this thing behind me all the while whispering to me, say my name. I don't know how long it went on, hours, maybe. It felt like days. We ran whenever we could. Wherever the ground was flat enough, we ran. But no matter how fast we went, we could never seem to outrun it. It was always right behind us, whispering in our ears. Ash, Ash, Ash. Such a waste of talent, such a waste of potential. Will your parents miss you when I've stripped the skin from your flesh? Will they notice you're gone when I've sucked the marrow from your bones? I thought the nightmare would never end. I thought I'd die on that trail, my bones picked clean and scattered among the rocks. No one would ever know where I'd gone. That I'd drag my friend to death alongside me. I've never run so fast as I did when I realized the trail had begun to loop back around to the trailhead, that I was almost to the car, only a quarter mile more to go. I don't remember falling. I only remember something grabbing my ankle and pulling me down, dragging me backwards. The sound of my own screams ringing in my ears. John screaming. John pulling on my arm, dragging me out of the creature's grip. Crawling up the last hill on my hands and knees, rocks slicing into my skin. Screaming. And then light. The parking lot. John pulling me back to my feet, running to the car. As we pulled out of the parking lot, tires screeching, I looked back and I saw it. Tall, corpse-pale, skeletal, skin stretched taut over bones. Hunched over on all fours, limbs inhumanly long with too many joints. No eyes, only gaping holes in its face. A grin of blackened razors as it watches us pull away, lifting one skeletal arm up to wave at us. A single human arm clutched in its grip, torn off at the shoulder. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.